For the second straight week, there's no change to the top 5 of Brandon Marcello's college football power rankings. Indiana continues to lead the way with Ohio State, Alabama, Texas A&M, and Georgia in tow. Cincinnati was the biggest riser last week, fell out of the power rankings after losing at Utah. Utes back in the chat at number 21. So again, taking a look at the updated top 10, no Vandy, Georgia Tech, or Miami after they all lost over the weekend. So Notre Dame, BYU, and Texas Tech all benefit as they were just outside of this tier a week ago. I'm Tommy Tran with Brandon Marcello, who puts her power rankings together, and we have Danny Kanell from the Cover 3 podcast with any agreements, disagreements, context. That's what we do this time every single week. So we pick things up just outside of the top 10. Brandon, with Texas, they got that win against Vandy. The schedule, we all think, allows itself for them to make a CFP push. Give me a sense of the Longhorns this week.
Yeah, they're on a winning streak right now, and they've beaten 2 opponents who were ranked in the top 10 at that time. And as a result of their record, they're still alive, though there's not much breathing room. I will say this, though, because of their schedule, they've got 2 more opponents left on the schedule that are top 5 worthy as of right now, according to the pollsters. If they can split those 2 and finish with a 9-3 record, I think we will see our first 3-loss team in the college football playoff, and that 3-loss team will be Texas. Now, keep in mind, Oklahoma is still out there looming, and that's a big win for Texas right now. So what happens if Oklahoma wins out? Does that not mean anything actually for Texas, and Texas gets in no matter what with 3 losses? Something to watch here, but because of how everything's shaking up in the ACC and Big 12 looking like one-bid leagues, it looks like the SEC might be the first conference to have a 3-loss team in there if Texas can win all but one more of their games against top 5 opponents.
Yeah, Brandon, I hate this, but I think you actually might be onto something too. And I will say this, because we've seen a lot of coaches out there. I think of Lincoln Riley. I think of Kirk Cignetti. And they talk about avoiding rivalry games in the case of USC Notre Dame, and Kirk Cignetti cancels a game versus Virginia because he says, I'm going to take the SEC model because scheduling non-conference tough opponents doesn't do anything for you. So if the committee did want to make a statement and say, you know what, Texas, you're 9-3 and your best loss is against Ohio State, one of the best teams in the country, by a touchdown, you know what? We're glad you scheduled that game as opposed to a directional school that you would have won by 4 or 5 touchdowns. That's the one thing that I'm looking at that I actually would be okay with, that the committee actually encouraged teams to schedule tough games out of conference, because I think they're the best thing for college football, and I think that would go a long way in sending a message to other programs of, you know what, we were impressed with what Texas tried to do to schedule a team like Ohio State, and also, by the way, played them as tough as anybody on the schedule. And only in college football do we talk about close losses, but Texas against Ohio State, it's one of the best close losses in the country.
Again, Georgia and Texas A&M, 2 out of the last 3 that we saw there on the scheduling graphic. Let's move on to Iowa, Brandon, where you continue to have them power rated higher than the AP poll.
Yeah, listen, their schedule isn't necessarily very difficult, and they haven't beaten top 25 teams, but they beat the teams that they should. And their best loss, as we were talking earlier about, we always talk about close losses. Their best loss is against Indiana, which I have number 1 in my power rankings, and they lost 20-15. No team has played Indiana any closer, any tougher, and has limited that offense. So Iowa has a big opportunity here coming up in these next couple of games, starting this week by hosting Oregon, a top 10 team, and then going on the road the very next week to USC, which is surging a little bit and clinging on very tightly to playoff hopes still. Iowa's in a very good position here to upset the apple cart, so to speak, in the Big Ten title race, but also maybe in the college football standings as well as we go forward these next couple of weeks.
It might not be the prettiest brand of football. Mark Gronowski, the transfer that had, won multiple national championships at the FCS level, he's been doing it more with his legs. But this is a tough physical team, like you would always expect from Kirk Ferentz. The one thing that I do look at, first of all, Iowa should be ranked. I'm glad you had them at 18th. They should be ranked in the top 25. It's a pretty egregious oversight that they're not in the top 25 for the AP. It'll be interesting to see where they debut tomorrow night. And you're right. Like the Indiana, this high-powered Indiana offense, which we think just roll through everybody, they did not roll through Iowa. That was one of their toughest games that they placed, where their offense was held in check, only 20 points in that game. So I'm very curious to see what Iowa can do against this Oregon team. And you want to throw a little gasoline on the fire. How about Phil Parker, the defensive coordinator, alluding to the fact that Oregon's roster is well funded? Remember the last time we heard a coach mention that about Oregon? It was Mike Gundy, and we saw how that played out against Oklahoma State. But this Iowa team is well equipped to potentially slow down the Oregon Ducks.
And anybody wants to go at Brandon in terms of Iowa, he's had the Hawkeyes in his power rankings at least the last couple of weeks. So again, this is not just something that he's throwing out there out of thin air. We saw on that list Miami at number 20. This was a team, Brandon, that at one point did hold the penthouse position in your power rankings. It seems like a lifetime ago, but right now a second loss of the season. This one has double-digit favorites against SMU. Where are you at with the Canes?
I just keep shrugging my shoulders because they look like world beaters August through October, and then once November hits the calendar, they look like just little kids running around the street playing grown up. And the common denominator here has been Mario Cristobal. I mean, I think he's like the perfect coach for Miami. He just understands everything there. Former player. He's galvanized the community there. He's brought in incredible talent, especially at the quarterback position over the last 2 years. And yet when they hit the back half of their schedule, they go like complete pretenders. And it's baffling to me. This is a roster built to not only win the ACC championship, but also potentially win the national championship. And to see them go on the road to SMU and look listless at times, and for Carson Beck to throw interceptions much like he did at Georgia last year, where you're just going, why is he throwing that ball? I just don't quite understand it. And everybody wants to ask the question of, why are they 4-11 in November and December under Mario Cristobal? What's the issue here? What's going on schematically? Let's just not look too deep into it. To me, the common denominator is Mario Cristobal. He's just not making the right tweaks to everything. I also hear him complaining a lot about how other teams are mimicking their snap count. I wouldn't be complaining about that, because that's more or less a reflection on you for not changing your snap count and changing things up late in the season when the book is out on you and these defensive coordinators can pick you apart.
Yeah, I thought that was an awful look. Don't be complaining about that after the game. You really should be tipping your cap to SMU, who's a pretty good football team. Like, say, hey, that was a great team. Maybe the ACC could take a page out of the SEC playbook and hype up everybody and say how tough it is to win in the conference, because I don't think that's that bad of a loss. SMU is a really good football team. Granted, Miami, this was another missed opportunity for them with a disastrous performance. I think Mario does the same thing in season that he does in games. He gets out 2 leads, and then he sits on them. I think this team recognized what they did in the first 5 games, and then they kind of got conservative. Let's not lose. Well, when you play that way, you're going to end up losing like they did on Saturday. So I would like to see them stay aggressive, but that is not in Mario's DNA. I will say this, though. I don't think Miami's playoff hopes are completely dashed. If they can win out, which is very much an if, especially that last game against Pitt, because Pitt's a really good football team. If they can win out, I do think they can close the gap somewhat and get closer to Notre Dame, which is what they need to do, because they're 8 spots away in the top 25. But if they can get in the same vicinity where you're comparing Notre Dame to Miami, they have the head-to-head against Notre Dame. So maybe that's their last hope, is if they're comparing those 2 resumes, and there is a recency bias, and I hate that because I don't think that's the way it should be. But if they can get in the same vicinity of Notre Dame, I think they stack up just as good or better resume-wise, and they own the head-to-head. I think that's the best-case scenario for the Miami Hurricanes.
You guys talk about turning the calendar. We're in November, which means we're fully into resume building. What have you done? Who have you beat? Who do you still have? And that leads us perfectly into Tuesday's college football playoff release in terms of what we had. And what we're doing, though, is kind of taking Brandon's power rankings and applying that to what we think potentially could happen here on a Tuesday. So here it stands. You got Indiana, Texas A&M, Alabama, and Ohio State all with the byes. You see who plays who. And for the moment, you also have James Madison in that G5 slot, Brandon. So take me through it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. You know, this is where everything stands now, of course. This is not a projection. It's where we would be if the playoff were played today. James Madison right now is a quick rising team that they're going to need some help. You look at the American Conference, you have kind of a 3-way race there right now. And that champion is probably still going to be ahead of James Madison in the end because of resume wins and them beating up on each other. But I would dare say if that conference champion emerges maybe here with 1 or even 2 losses, of course, James Madison might jump up there and supplant them and make it into the playoff hunt right now. And as I see it, James Madison is playing better than anybody else. I think no one would really argue with the buys there. I would say that I think a lot of people would argue about Alabama being over Texas A&M. How is an Alabama team with 1 loss over an undefeated A&M? And look, simply put, you look at the power rankings, you look at the resume, Alabama owns 4 straight wins against ranked opponents. Texas A&M does not quite have that. But A&M's schedule does get a little bit tougher here down the stretch, including this week, going to a top 25 Mizzou team on the road. So A&M has an opportunity here, even as an undefeated, to supplant Alabama there in the rankings. But I don't know if anybody would really argue all that much. That's just my opinion with this playoff bracket as it stands right now. But what do you think, Danny?
So I think it's pretty spot on, but where I'm curious is what we're going to learn tomorrow night, because we've heard a lot about this advanced metric that they're going to use to try to look at strength of schedules and give those more credit. So is there a chance that Texas A&M as an undefeated SEC team potentially checks in over the Big Ten teams? Is there a chance that Indiana comes in over Ohio State? Like, what do the metrics that they're using, but which we won't find out, like I wish we could have more transparency, what are the big differences there? Are there some shakeups? Because very rarely they just fall right in line. Sure, they might have the same 12 teams, but as we just showed with your bracket, seedings come into play because who gets the bye, who has the edge there in the rankings is going to play a huge factor. So the teams at the top, BYU is an undefeated Big 12. Where do they come in? 2-loss Notre Dame. Do they love them as much as everybody else? There are going to be some really intriguing spots to see where the teams come out tomorrow night, according to the College Football Selection Committee.
We'll find out Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Fellas, certainly appreciate it. By the way, check the entire Power Rankings list on CBSSports.com for Brandon's Power Rankings. Then check out Danny with Tom Fornelli, Bud Elliott, and Chip Patterson over in the Cover 3. Scan the QR code however you listen to your podcast, as well as check them out on YouTube.